So the thing I mentioned that I would do in my last video is happening like I said it would. It's time for a Palworld video, my friends, a la Classic RPG Fox Edition, which means that I'm going to break this game down into bite-sized pieces that are so digestible that even a newborn baby could eat them. So obviously Palworld is the new hot thing that everyone is talking about. I'm making this video because I want to cast my hat into the ring of YouTube videos while deviating from the usual slop that comes from your search bar about it. You see, there's this trend with Palworld where anytime that it gets mentioned by a content creator, it's damn near impossible for them not to say the words Pokemon with guns, plagiarism, or AI generation. I imagine a lot of it has to do with like farming a hot topic in the gaming sphere at the moment, so it feels like everybody making a video about Palworld has a fucking checklist in front of them with these topics and ready to give their opinions. The thing is, I hate copy-pasting my version of video trends that other people make. And I also hate perpetuating controversy by giving my 2 cents that nobody asked for just to gain a couple new followers. I have better things to do with my time, ladies and gentlemen, like dump 40 hours into Palworld and unconditionally enjoy video gaming for the first time since I bought RimWorld. Anyway, I have a pretty solid amount of time clocked in on it, mostly in my solo world than anything else. This means that I've been able to progress the game at my own pace and do whatever the hell that I want while playing. That of course translates into break the game in any way possible with a notepad ready so I can take notes for a future YouTube video. Lo and behold, within the first 5 minutes of playing the game, I figured out how to jettison my character into the fucking Palpago stratosphere just because I'm a curious fox like that. The point of everything that I just said is that I've had a very focused experience with the game involving learning the extent of its mechanics. I wouldn't call myself a sweaty tryhard or anything, since that implies that I would have min-maxed my time to be as efficient as possible with the game's progression. I have not. I'm merely a level 38 player, with my highest level pal being 5 levels beneath me, but I will say that while all the VTubers on Twitch are having a blast with their friends and goofing off with their multiplayer worlds, I've been flexing the strengths of my ADHD and hyper-focusing my attention on any bugs or potentially unintended features that I found in order to give awareness to them and possibly help out the devs, should the video circulate. This video exists for 3 reasons. The first is to gush about my experience with the game. I'm a simple man. I like to talk about things that I'm passionate about. This has been a mantra of my channel for almost a decade. Second reason is to showcase the list of the bugs and problems I noticed while playing Palworld in order to bring awareness, like I said in the last paragraph. And third, I want to offer suggestions for potential quality of life changes or small tweaks to the gameplay that I feel would otherwise make the game feel a bit nicer to play. I want to clarify that the third reason is less about trying to be an authoritarian on how I think the game should be made, but rather I'm trying to offer up a perspective. On that note, let's start with the first section, which is my experience followed by the big W's that the game accomplishes. Now, believe it or not, I was actually avoiding Palworld for a while now. The game seemingly blew the fuck up out of nowhere, and I wasn't sold on playing it for a bit because, well, I'm a bit of a hipster at times, and I avoid hype trains. However, my sense has returned to me after a bit, and I remembered that I've been aware of Palworld, because, again, I have lots of hours clocked into Craftopia, and I pay attention to their development. And after a few days of avoiding it on Twitch and YouTube, I finally just manned up and bought it. I do not regret a thing. Like, seriously, I'm not even a big fan of Pokemon at all. I never have been, but Palworld just gives you that dopamine hit. It's just a very well-designed game. It's the kind of game that you start up and then 6 hours disappear over what felt like 20 minutes, and then you're wondering what the hell happened during that time frame. Where did the time go? Games that are kind of comparable to this sort of hypnotic experience for me would have to be Factorio, Satisfactory, and RimWorld. All gave me a similar experience. There are very few games out there that have put me into the kind of flow state where I completely lose track of hours of my time. It's usually a thing that only happens while I'm hyper-focusing on a task that I want to complete. AKA, I'm either programming or trying to troubleshoot something that just doesn't fucking work. I really need to obsess over something in order to lose track of time like that, which is funny because I know that now that I'm older, it needs to be pretty fucking life-changing for me to obsess over it. I have some serious commitment issues with a lot of things pertaining to video games. For me, sunk cost fallacy sounds like a weird news headline for a capsizing cruise ship. Anyway, the point of everything that I'm saying is to enforce the fact that Palworld does a really good job at holding the player's attention, but anecdotal evidence isn't enough, so how would I prove it? Well, this is where my big W's list begins, ladies and gentlemen, so let's start with a few game design concepts that I noticed. First off, Palworld is extremely good at what Aaron in his Ego Raptor days referred to as conveyance. To break it down, this means that the game has a very solid, invisible tutorial, if you will. In other words, the game has many aspects and mechanics that come to the player very naturally. While there is a tutorial of tasks the player can follow at the beginning of the game to grasp basic mechanics, most of the more in-depth aspects of the game are taught well from inside the game's environment. This varies from person to person, but let me give you a solid example here. The first thing that comes to my mind is the automation of your pals in the base. You've all seen the sweatshop memes of all the pals building things for you and farming. Well, the automation system works as a great point for this, as it's easy to see the streamer's base be run by all of these pals when you go onto Twitch, and not necessarily understanding what's going on under the hood. I'm not going to go very in-depth with this, but in short, every pal has certain work types that they will perform autonomously. Following the tasks at the beginning of the game should walk you through placing a bench, having your pal station, and everything that you would need to deploy your pals at your base. The starting zone has 3 starting pals that are the first ones that you will likely capture. That is the Chickapee, the Cativa, and the adorable Lamballs. 2 out of 3 of these have the handiwork autonomy option. To a new player, this might not be very clear on how specifically the autonomy works until you craft something or place a structure with a Cativa or a Lamball that's on base. Suddenly your little guys will trot their way over to the workbench and craft those 12 pal spheres that you started. And lo and behold, you are building a bunch of things on a crafting bench with your pal. Bingo bango. Now you understand that they just do shit without you needing to command them specifically to do it. And this also applies to all levels of the game, mind you. The game does an extremely good job of slowly introducing more and more base building mechanics without feeling way too overwhelming. Not to mention that there's also a survival guide if you need a reference sheet. In the 40 hours I have played Palworld, there wasn't a single time where I just sat there staring at my computer screen wondering how to work the generator, or deal with my sanity management, or mine, or any of that stuff. It all comes second nature without you needing to exhaust yourself with convoluted mechanics, but also has enough mechanical depth to reward players who decide to master them. Like genuinely, how many of you guys had to open up a web page to figure something out about Palworld? And if you did, I guarantee you that it was to figure out something like where bones were, or high quality pal oil. And I want to clarify that the UI assists a lot with this. You can see the location of any pal that you've bumped into, as well as see their drops if you've defeated or captured one. You have all the resources that you need from inside of the game to accomplish tasks without relying on Effextra Life for a change, which is nice. Not only that, but the game also trims the fat really well, meaning that everything in the game seems to have its place. There isn't a single pal, piece of equipment, or item that I've ever picked up in Palworld and thought was literally useless. Every pal has their own identity, each weapon has its own value, and each drop has its own usage and value towards the game for crafting that I typically can remember on the fly. Like I said previously, Palworld is just really good at adding just enough mechanical depth without bogging everything down through convoluted bullshit. You feel rewarded for mastering the game, but you also don't feel like the game is intentionally getting in your way either. And I want everyone to take a second to realize how hard of a balance that is to strike with a video game. Everything in this game feels very intentional, if that makes sense. It feels like everything was designed with some level of intent, rather than just being thrown into the game because other video games like this have a mechanic like that. Wow, that was a lot of talking for basically 1 point. Anyway, the last few points that I have aren't as complicated, so let's go through the remaining big W's in a more concise manner. Next up is the world exploration. So some people might think that the world feels a little empty in Palworld, but I'd like to argue that between the pal environments that show you where each pal can be found, the boss arenas, the chests, and even the biomes, the exploration in Palworld is not only serviceable, but it's done quite well. Or at least it's done better than the average open world game. We're not talking about your average Ubisoft game that paints the open world with a bunch of events to clear out in order to progress the game. There are actual environments to find that have specific pals in them, and each of these pals might have a specific drop that you need for making a handgun or something. This gives each area of the open world its own value, because you have a reason to return there if you need a certain resource. This doesn't even take dungeon locations into account, considering the fact that the easiest way to level up by long and far is to capture 10 of each pal in the game. This also means that leveling up and exploring are a feedback loop into the primary mechanic of Palworld, which is capturing new pals. This means that the player is incentivized to branch out and explore the world. And I don't know about you guys, but I actually really liked the available content in the game. Dungeon delving, tech point pal bosses, lucky pal hunting, the boss pals, they're all lovely touches that add a little extra replay value into the game and add a bit of optional grind while you play around with the combat system. Speaking of the combat system, can we take a moment to appreciate the combat in Palworld, because holy shit is it good. There are of course hiccups and flaws with it, but for the most part the game's combat is pretty damn fluid. Enemy pal attacks are very much avoidable for a remotely skilled player that has a good dodge timing. The gunplay feels... it feels good in most circumstances, at least, the overwhelming amount of them. The pal versus pal combat looks like a legit Pokemon fight in real time while you can pepper the bitch with some good old 9mm bullets. The game just feels really good to engage with, not to mention that the game runs pretty damn good. I've only had a small handful of times where the game chugged or dropped its frame rate, which almost always is tied to loading into an area or loading into the world. Or when it was in a specific environment that probably was very busy on the rendering level. In other words, the performance hiccups were expected and didn't really ruin my experience. And finally, the game is just very gorgeous looking. Like, I don't know how else to say it other than that. It's got a very solid style to it, and it just looks pretty good. I've not noticed many graphical bugs, if any, and the world just looks lovely to traverse. Even the animations in this game are very fluid looking, which reminds me, take note that every pal in this game has its own animations. This includes running animations, mining animations, attack animations, hit stuns, etc. All of these movements had to be animated, and I imagine that it took quite a lot of work to do. I'd be very surprised if it didn't, at least. And many of the working animations of the pals can be sort of personality showing, if that makes sense. Like, from Depresso's mining away at a rock in his no-fucks-given temperament, all the way up to Catrus building structures by levitating the hammer above her head and not actually holding it. You can kind of get a read of each pal's personality from their animations, if that makes sense. And I find that to be indicative of a certain level of quality behind the work of the animators. Either way, that about wraps up the pros section, but before we talk about the big L's of Palworld, I also want to take a moment to make a disclaimer. I'm not at all trying to bash this game. When we reach the bugs and issues section, it might sound like I'm shitting on Palworld, but I'm not. The goal is to catalog the bugs for an early access game belonging to a company that I have a lot of commitment towards. Like, literally, look at my past videos, there's a lot of Craftopia back there. Pocket Pair is a company with a shitload of potential, and I have had a lot of fun playing both Craftopia and Palworld. I've just simply spent a lot of time playing, so I'm very intimately familiar with a lot more of the negative aspects of the gameplay. Palworld isn't perfect, we all know that, but the game's high points far exceed the lows and annoyances. So if I need to dig this deep and get that pedantic to say something negative about the gameplay, then think of it this way. That means that the devs made a pretty damn good game. So we're going to go through a number of blemishes, bugs, and issues I found while playing, starting off with the ones I think are the most important. And then we'll move over to some of the more pedantic ones that would be nice to see fixed, but ultimately are just silly, rather than being mildly annoying. We're going to begin with one of the most talked about blemishes in the game, which is the AI pathfinding. Now, everyone across all walks of Palworld life, big or small, casual or sweaty, have experienced firsthand the myriad of pathfinding issues that are within it. From things that are downright silly to situations that are actually quite debilitating, there is no shortage of pathfinding bugs. Many people specifically point out the many pathfinding issues of your pals during autonomy when you deploy them at your base, but I find a majority of these are silly little hiccups that more often than not can actually bolster your experience because they're just simply hilarious to see, and most of them can be worked around through your gameplay more often than not. For example, pals get stuck the most on weird edges at the end of your base area, non-flat surfaces with random obstructions like rocks or just cooking pots, as well as positioning themselves on devices to commit to a task. These circumstances can be mostly avoided by walling your base in and keeping your pals in specific areas, providing a flat foundation and, weirdly enough, rotating your structures 180 degrees while placing. Because another small issue that I've noticed is that if your pals insist on coming at a bench from a really odd angle, and then they get stuck in a wall, if you try flipping the orientation of the structure in question, then it'll usually fix the problem. My Wixens insisted on kindling my cooking pots and smelters at really awkward angles opposite of what I was expecting. And then once I rotated them, my Wixens are now suddenly the most efficient pals in my base. What I will say that is a strict annoyance, especially for the more OCD of Palworld enjoyers, is that the pals who transport items tend to just drop shit all over the base, and it pisses me off. There's always just this trail of berries that leads into my food stock, and I just... Look, I don't know, man, but every time that they do it, it tilts me a little bit. I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. Now, the bigger issue with AI in this game to me are the various clipping issues and the AI that is associated to certain auto-attacks with enemies and pals. All of us have at one point or another seen an enemy that got stuck literally in the geometry. This can be a bit unfortunate when the pal you're trying to capture in a cave suddenly decides that they want to nightcrawler their ass into the nearby bedrock. In fact, pal spheres in general cause a lot of really weird clipping problems in general. The joke I made earlier about launching myself into the stratosphere was actually caused by, you guessed it, a fucking pal sphere. I genuinely hope that this issue never gets fixed, since it's just so goddamn funny to slingshot myself into the sun, simply by climbing onto a pal sphere while it's capturing. And back to the auto-attack AI, something I've noticed a lot is that some pals are hard-coded to space themselves from an enemy before loosing certain very specific projectile attacks. The pal that immediately comes to mind is Chillet. I've had far too many times where Chillet spends 15 minutes trying to get about 20 meters away so that he can bury some heat-seeking ice shards into somebody's skull. Chillet also seems to have what I call Great Dane syndrome, which means that they do the same thing that big dogs do, and they don't have great spatial awareness, which makes the pal walk towards their target in perpetuity until the AI detects that they are at the correct range from the enemy, which can make Chillet get stuck walking into an enemy due to the really large model size. It's more often than not silly to watch rather than all that debilitating, but when you run around some of the level 30 areas, having your pal hesitate to take aggro from an enemy even for a split second can and it will get you killed, I guarantee you. And that's a shame, because I really like Chillet as a pal. It's kind of like if Sub-Zero and a ferret had a big... Oh god, wait, no, forget what I said. Fuck it, it's too late now. The Rule 34 artists are already working on it, and we have already strayed further from God. Another big issue that I think needs to be addressed are hitboxes. Yeah, this segment is weird because it's incredibly inconsistent. The hitbox problem only seems to affect specific attacks and weapons rather than plague the game in totality, and the target of the attack matters tremendously. This can be easily noticed if anyone is like me and spent 90% of their playtime riding a Dire Howl, since Air Cannon, Fierce Fang, and Power Shot all have really annoying hitbox issues or tracking issues. Now, before we continue with that thought, it bears mentioning that the crosshair in this game feels... It feels off. I can't really place my finger on it, but it feels like the third-person camera lies a bit about where the projectile is going, depending on your distance from the target. This isn't strictly an issue with Palworld, mind you. I feel like all third-person camera angles with shooter mechanics struggle with this. Why that matters is because using Dire Howl's melee attack up close can be infuriating to land while you're mounting one. Your angle adjusts slightly at the time of attack, causing you to whiff your target. This will happen frequently, unless you get used to the unnatural feeling of the attack. Not to mention that Fierce Fang simply cannot hit some smaller enemies whatsoever. It's literally impossible. It will not hit a Gumas, I guarantee you. The hitbox of this attack just never seems to collide with certain models when manually aimed. Well, no big deal, Dire Howl can use Air Cannon or Power Shot as well, which would be great if both projectiles didn't have aggressive tracking that can often miss the enemy. Air Cannon can be freely aimed, but if you use it within a requisite distance of a targetable enemy, the attack will automatically be determined to shoot at and lock on the closest one, even if they're currently being detained in a PAL sphere. And Power Shot suffers from a similar issue with tracking targets you aren't immediately aiming at, while also having some absolutely cracked out tracking that causes it to just dance around and do some really weird shit. And then there's Dire Howl's Mudball attack, which moves so unbelievably slow that I have only ever used this attack when I am literally sniffing somebody's ass or their crotch. It is the only attack with zero tracking when you manually aim it, which is fucking strange, because it's the only attack that I would love to have aggressive tracking for. In fact, Dire Howl's AI will practically heat-seek a target down with this skill, but when you free aim it, the skill not only fails because of the slow velocity, but it is also inconsistent as hell when it comes to the distance that it travels. If you haven't manually used a lot of skills on a Dire Howl, then trust me, try them. I guarantee that you will see some of the things that I mean. I'll still use the hell out of this PAL because there simply is no land mount that is faster than a Dire Howl that I'm aware of, so the transportation is invaluable. But it's just disappointing that the PAL skills feel so terrible to use manually. In short, the third-person perspective line combined with some of the odd character pivoting and lock-on effects applied while using certain skills and attacks in Palworld, they just feel really bad to use, so it's not strictly a hitbox issue, but a combination of things that combine for this perfect storm that ruins any chance of you hitting your target. There's a reason why 80% of my footage on a dire howl usually involves me just shooting at people on the back of them. The next big point for me involves the user interface. Now, previously I praised the UI for being good to discern information from without needing a wiki page open. However, there are some places where the UI needs a bit of work. For example, it's strange that I can't see how much defense that my next suit of armor has before I craft it. Same goes for making food, since there are certain food items that you can create with the same materials in it, just maybe with some extra berries or something with it. So meat can make 2 different dishes, is what I'm saying. And it would be nice to see if whichever one has more satiety increase versus the sanity increases and decreases and such, just to make an educated decision to which dish that I want to make if I'm limited on materials. Furthermore, some aspects of the game simply do not have enough information given to the player to understand what is feasibly happening. Do any of you guys notice a difference when you enhance a PAL skill of a pet that doubles up as a mount? Like, genuinely? Do they have more stamina? Do you move faster? It would be nice to know exactly what is happening and what specifically is being buffed when you enhance a PAL skill at the statue. I spent a ton of time breeding and catching dire howls to get a level 3 riding skill only to catch a random wild female with 30% move speed from 2 different traits. And on a full bar of stamina, she can actually go further than my level 3 PAL skill dire howl that I've been using for 80% of the game. So I'm genuinely uncertain if upgrading a PAL skill actually does change the extent of the stamina bar, or if I'm just gaslighting myself and it's just the placebo effect in full swing. 40 hours in and I still have no idea what capture power does, even when I upgrade it at the PAL statue while we're on this. Absolutely, it would likely increase my rates of capturing a PAL, but it's unclear how exactly it boosts these rates, or how it's even helping. You've probably noticed that sometimes when you throw a PAL sphere at a target, the rate will increase from what the UI initially shows while you're holding the sphere. I was under the impression that before throwing a PAL ball was the base rate, and then after you toss it, the game calculates your capture power. But I tested this on a fresh character that does not have any capture power, and it still gives you a random increase of capture chance after throwing a ball if you lower the health of the PAL in question. Which then raises another question. Why is my capture chance increasing if the UI is showing a higher chance to capture it after reducing its health? The rate is higher before I toss my PAL sphere, then raises slightly. Like, genuinely, what is happening here? Also, have you guys ever obtained a sphere launcher? Because first off, the game never even shows what the capture rate is when you use it. Not to mention the fact that if you look at the PAL sphere launcher, it says that it requires rockets to fire, which... false. But I don't know, I just find this item completely useless at the moment because I wind up just holding Q anyway just to see what my rates are before I even use the sphere launcher, so otherwise useless item. And then for my last annoying UI bug, if you've ever leveled up your pals while in the field while you are mounting them, then you'll probably notice that leveling them up actually swaps your active skills in your palette for any new skills that you unlock. This isn't a game ruiner. However, this has both been the cause of my death, as well as the death of a number of pals that I've tried to capture across the Palpagos Islands, because of a skill that I relied on that was in my mount's hotbar just suddenly swapped out for a skill that was way longer to cast and had a bigger punish window, or just fucking murked the thing that I was aiming at. I think the majority of players would definitely appreciate it if new skills only populated empty skill slots. And the final major point that I'm going to make regards raid scaling, weirdly enough. Now, I'd like to know the experiences of people other than myself, but after hitting about level 30, the game seemed to lean towards an almost vertical increase in both difficulty and leveling up. After putting more time into the game, however, things suddenly got really easy. Like, too easy, in fact. Which leads me to believe that the health and damage scaling of the enemies in the second half of the game are just incredibly fucking inconsistent. It's very weird. I hate using things like hard or easy as definitive words for anything objective, because it's just misleading. It doesn't work. It depends on a number of different factors. The gear that the player is using, their strategies, what they're having to deal with. It's just, I don't know. Difficulty is a subjective term. So I'm gonna say the health and the damage of enemies doesn't seem to scale quite right. Anyone who has dealt with the humanoid grenadiers and cleaner enemies should know exactly what I mean by this, because cleaners have an absolutely absurd amount of health compared to the normal crossbow and handgun-wielding variants that you fought earlier in the game. And I'm not exactly against this change, but my first few raids after about level 30 felt like there was simply nothing that I could do against them. My guns that I had could not deal enough damage to deal with the grenadiers that were annihilating my ranged pals standing still in the back line, and they were slaughtered like dogs. The obnoxious thing about this is that I don't have any footage of the raids that kicked my ass after level 30. It's very frustrating because raids are apparently really difficult to get footage for since they just happen randomly. But I remember a very specific raid when my OBS was closed where a bunch of pals that are called Bushi wound up raiding my base. With about 15 of my highest level pals, we couldn't even put a dent in them. I even had a single-shot rifle with refined metal armor at the time. I just couldn't deal enough damage to thin this pack out, and my pals got wiped out. So did I. Also, it just didn't even seem like my armor could do anything to keep me safe during this. I didn't feel any tankier. I just felt like paper mache for some reason. Like I said, the raid footage that I have just shows me dunking on people, but I bring this up because I don't think that the raid scaling takes into account the player's arsenal or the highest level pals that they've attained. It seems to just kind of throw random amounts of randomly chosen enemies at your base and then calling it a day, depending on what your level is, like your actual player level in-game. And this results in comical things like your base being raided by 3 fucking Toko, or upwards of 20 Grenadiers and Cleaner class NPCs. I want to clarify that I'm also not against the game having a difficulty spike at 30, but when you take in mind the limited damage that the player can take, as well as there being 0 health potions, or at least none at this point in the game that I have found, it means that the game can feel really punishing at times, honestly. Again, this isn't inherently an issue so long as the player has agency over how badly that their ass cheeks get clapped by the enemies, but just to put it into perspective for you, I can easily deal with a one-on-one against an enemy that is much stronger than I. What I can't deal with is when there's 20 of them all wielding guns, there's red telegraph circles popping up over every place, like all over the place in my base, because of the Grenadiers, while there's also 12 dudes with shotguns that are peppering me. To quote Rusty in his 10 Worst Bloodborne Enemies video, you are either arm wrestling a toddler or bench pressing a house. Pick one. Oh, still have your attention, do I? Good. Well, we're going to shotgun the last few bugs and annoyances I found while playing Palworld before reaching our last segment. I'll open by saying the Genshin Impact style climbing system is just way too fucking aggressive and can be difficult to crest edges with at times. I didn't like this in Genshin Impact, and I don't like it in Palworld. I feel like it's way too easy to accidentally become a human barnacle and stick to a wall when you least need it to happen. A lot of that being because the clipping is just, I don't know, it's a bit odd in this game. Anyway, let's move on to some simpler bugs, like UI rendering, because there are some items in the game that don't show up on your character in the inventory screen, but are very clearly textured on the player. My example being the metal headband that I'm wearing. I've not found another example yet, since my witch hat didn't have this issue, and I've not seen very many hats yet. A very acceptable bug that's more silly than it is annoying would be that none of the pals actually have swimming animations, from what I've noticed. Not unless their idle animation is them swimming, of course. Dire Howl just straight sprints while they're walking on water like Jesus Christ himself, and I love it. A very obscure animation bug that I've found is that if you have a very specific level of over-encumbrance and then you pull out your pickaxe, your walking animation actually just kind of sucks your arm inside of your character's model. It's another one of those bugs that honestly enhances the game experience by being fucking silly, but I doubt this is intended. Now moving on to a bug that actually is a little bit annoying, if you have ever played around with walls and gates, then you might recognize these next two. Starting with the stone walls, I've had my wall segments just straight up disappear from one specific side of my base. I've never had it happen again or had it recorded at all, but the west wall of my base has had its walls just vanish into thin air on 2 separate occasions, and both times they were different wall segments. It was never the same one. The second time it happened, I literally looked at the west side towards the lake, and then just look at the other wall, and then they disappeared into the Blender dimension. It was absurd. I originally thought that an Eikthyr deer just kind of ran through my walls or something when I wasn't paying attention, but after the second time it literally disappeared, when I looked away and looked back, I knew that they were just despawning for some reason. So my theory is that there's maybe a structure limit? I don't know, especially considering these walls are outside of my base territory, and that wall was placed down before the rest of the base. So it could have also disappeared after a certain amount of time was elapsed if you place walls outside of a base building zone. I genuinely have no clue what happened here, though. It's by far the weirdest bug that I've encountered yet. The second part of this involves gates, as stone gates are treated as closed if you leave the world that they are in, regardless whether or not that they were open when you left. This leads to some really funny interactions, since you can actually climb on an invisible wall. Just close and open the gates and that should fix the problem. As an addendum to the weird pathfinding and automation issues that were mentioned earlier, pals also seem to look in random directions, or their animations just straight up break while they're performing autonomous actions. Here's a clip of my Wixen just staring into the void and looking for answers, when she should be lighting my furnace on fire on a bended knee. Repairing and changing equipment of any kind makes your shields recharge. I've never tested this while in combat, but I imagine changing gear mid-fight is not advised. That, or it will actually force your shield to fully recharge when it absolutely shouldn't. And for the last bug of note, putting food into your inventory or into a container will reset the decay counter. I feel like this would be acceptable if it was just with a fridge, but this happens in every container in the game, and I doubt it's intended. This doesn't happen if you click and drag it, mind you. It'll only happen if you specifically right-click that item and put it into the container instantly. Also, this seems to happen when you hit the sort button in your inventory, which is... That's fucking weird, man. Okay, anyway, with that last statement, we have now gotten through the bugs section, so congratulations for making it this far. I feel like I missed something in there, but I don't know. I think it's fine. There was a lot of shit in there, even if I did miss a point or two that I wanted to mention. Either way, the next segment is going to be a sort of in-between section. Neither a pro nor a con, just behaviors of the game that I have noticed, and couldn't either tell if it was intended behavior or something that would just be better if it were addressed. So, let's get into it. Also, if you're wondering why I look different, don't worry, this just happens sometimes. I'm going to start by saying one last point to tack onto the whole PAL automation thing at the base, and that's the occurrence of when a PAL will make progress on whatever it is that their current task is, despite not being at the station yet. This happens most notably when a PAL wakes up from sleep. I remember an occurrence in particular when my Wixen woke up while she was running to the cooking pot, and she was somehow in the middle of cooking jam-filled buns. She wasn't at the station yet, and then she walked over, did her animation as normal, and everything continued as normal. Also onto the behaviors of PALs, at the moment I noticed that they don't recover their satiety while they're in the PAL deck, which can get a little bit obnoxious when you own a fucking 100 PALs, and you pull out an old one that you used as a base bitch and realize that they're still hangry. I feel like PALs should just recover their satiety slowly over time. I don't know, it just seems like there's a little too much micromanaging in that one. You guys let me know how you feel about it. Also, did you guys know that your pals actually lose sanity when they are not deployed to the base and they are in your party? Yeah, I only realized this very recently, in fact. Your pals actually do lose sanity whenever that they receive damage when they are out in the field. I actually don't despise this system at all. I think that's perfectly fine if it exists as is. However, I would like to be able to see my sanity bar with a lot more ease than having to go into their examination menu specifically. Simply being able to see their sanity bar in the bottom left corner, or just opening up your party menu and then seeing the sanity in the party would be tremendously helpful. Don't get me wrong, it seems like it's really difficult to completely dip their sanity when you're bringing them out on an adventure, but it is possible if you were to continue to go for a long time and then just keep your pal deployed and using skills. It is, in theory, possible. It just would be easier to see what their sanity bar is at all times, so players are aware of that. A bit on combat, believe it or not, I have here is, while I love the fact that the pals can deflect pal spheres that you throw at them, depending on certain circumstances and what attacks that they're doing, I wish it was just a little bit more clear when those windows were possible. For example, imagine if they kind of just had a red flash when they did an unblockable attack, quote-unquote, which means that anytime that you threw a pal sphere at them, then it would bounce off. I feel like there are certain pals that just have really long windows where you're not able to hit them with a pal sphere for seemingly no reason. I don't know, it just doesn't seem like it's telegraphed very well. I feel like if it were, then it would make the combat a lot more engaging to work with, rather than just feeling like you're getting cucked out of a free capture. A small thing that you can also do in this game, whether or not that you're aware, is if you have the grappling hook and you're completely over-encumbered, you can still move around with it. Again, I don't know if this is intended or not, but it is a thing that do be happening. Speaking of annoyances while capturing pals, something that I noticed is that certain pals don't seem to really fit their expected hitbox when you're throwing a pal sphere at them. It's very aggressive on where it hits the pal, so usually it's forgiving, but the vanworms in particular, I don't know, they're weird. You need to aim like really high to be able to hit their body, whereas their tails and their feet, they just drag off a long portion off of the bottom of their body, leading you to believe that you can get away with hitting the lower half, but if you do this, I guarantee you the pal sphere is just gonna go right through them. It's another one of those not a big deal sort of things. They could never change this and it really wouldn't affect the game too terribly since you would just learn to aim higher, but I don't know, it just feels like it's a little misleading on the way that the hitbox appears to the player. Here's one pertaining to base building. I would also love to see a move option with the structures in the future. The reason for this is because the weight system is honestly very punishing. It isn't the end of the world if they never change it, but there are many times where I've destroyed a structure just to move it, and then I awkwardly stand in place because now I'm over encumbered. I would love to just be able to move it somewhere else with a different button. Continuing with the base building, while we're at it, it's rather annoying that you can't place structures while pals are occupying the exact area that you're going to put things down. I understand this with walls, but this is particularly annoying when it comes to pal pathfinding and if you're placing floors, like if you're going to add an extra crop field for wheat or something like that. It's really annoying when you have like a fucking Bronto that just wanders into the area when you're about to place things down. I feel like it would just be better if you could place it anyway, even if that does clip the pal into the floor, and then worst case scenario, you just go ahead and replace them or you pick them up and move them elsewhere. Next, I feel like it would also be pretty neat if we had some more intuitive storage decisions, specifically when it comes to storing food in feeding stations. Far too many times I've seen my pals harvest wheat or harvest lettuce or tomatoes, throw them into a food station, and then they just get eaten as soon as they're being produced. Now there's a way to be able to get around that where you can just kind of put it in the rightmost node and they'll prioritize eating left to right in a feed station, but it's still just annoying that they default to dropping things off into the very same station that they consume food from. I feel like if we just had like certain ways to filter this down or a specific chest that they prioritize dropping anything that is loose into, then that would be great. Maybe like a dumping zone by RimWorld equivalents. Next, I would also like to be able to name pins in this game. I feel like that would help a lot of people in general. It's great that we're able to mark the map a seemingly infinite number of times to be able to mark dungeons and hotspots of things that we like trees that have all the different move seeds and stuff. However, if we could actually name the pins rather than just have an indication for it, I feel like that would be even better, because for some of these dungeons, it would also be super nice to be able to know what the level is of the dungeon that we're going into, so we can just know from a glance what we're going to do rather than having to dedicate it to memory, you know what I mean? Either that or if we could color code it even further, something like that. I feel like even that would get the same job done. And then the next, honestly, just pertains to buttons and controls, really. The next two, that is. So first off, holding F for PAL skills literally anywhere near an interactable just completely cancels the PAL skill, which can be a little annoying at times, because if there's just a tree, like a branch underneath you, or a rock, which is very common for this to happen, mind you, then you can't actually dismount from your pet. And again, it's not the end of the world, it's just one of those kind of things where, like, in a split-second notice, it can stop you from doing the right input that you want, and can just lead to some mild frustrations. Or at worst-case scenario, your death. So I feel like it should just prioritize you hopping off of your mount or using a PAL skill, regardless of if there's an interactable there. I feel like you should just use the PAL skill before anything else. And then secondly, hitting E when you're changing pals, so if there's like a different pal selected when you hit E, ordinarily it's supposed to just de-summon or put your pal away if it's on the same one. But if it's on a different one, then it'll swap them out. And I think that that much is fine, but if you hit E and then change the pal afterwards, it'll still wind up swapping the pal out and throwing a new one out afterwards, which leads to some mild frustrations in dungeons when it comes to trying to actually capture another pal. I've killed a lot of pals I'm trying to be in the middle of capturing that are on like 0 health almost, because I panicked and I hit the wrong button and then threw out another pal, and then they just absolutely fucking murk the guy that I was going to throw a pal sphere at. So I feel like if you just hit E and then swapped to another pal, it should by default do the input based off of the state of when you hit the E button initially, not afterwards. It literally is just like a simple coding thing, I feel. That's what it sounds like to me. I feel like they just need like a line of code somewhere at the beginning when the input is pressed rather than at the end. All right, and with that being said, right there, guys, we're done. We're done. That is everything that I wanted to mention. This is gonna be a pain in the ass to edit later on in HitFilm, my god. But anyway, so this is just the end of the video, guys. Nothing else to really say here. I've been really enjoying my time with Palworld. I hope that doesn't really sound too negative, that I've spent so much of this time focusing on all of the bugs and the things that I have for suggestions for it, but like otherwise, like I said, it has been an abundantly and overwhelmingly enjoyable experience. Every now and again, I do get a little bit annoyed from some of the hiccups, from some of the control setups, and just random things with how the mechanics behave, but otherwise, I've never really been annoyed or upset at the game longer than maybe a split second or two. So it's been a very solid experience so far, and I've been enjoying the hell out of it. And you guys should too. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I certainly enjoyed being able to get all of the footage and the experience necessary to be able to make it. I like doing video essays. I'm not the best at it by long and far, but I would like to think that I do put a moderate amount of effort into it where there is quality there, and people do enjoy hearing me just go on a tirade about shit. There was definitely some repeat footage used throughout the video, mostly because I figured that they actually did work in multiple scenarios, or they were just funny to watch. It's really hilarious watching Chillet just fucking run into people and not be able to know that he's directly on top of their tank. It's great. I'm not one that's ever really the type to ask to like, favorite, or subscribe a video that I put out. However, when I do these sorts of things, it is nice to see people engage and show that they give a shit about them in any way, shape, or form, so I would ask if there's anything that you do exactly that. Engage with the video, share it with your Discord servers. If you think that I did a damn fine job on it, tell other people that give a shit about video essays, especially when it comes to anything regarding Palworld. I have high hopes for this game. That being said, that is my 2 cents on this Pal video right here, or this Palworld video, rather. Don't mind me, I've been recording audio this entire day. I'm starting to have a stroke when it comes to thinking about things to say, and I am leaving that one in. You guys take it easy, I will see you later on. Let me know if you want to see a follow-up video for this for something. I don't know what it would be for, but yeah. Hopefully not guide content. I do not fucking want to do any kind of guide content with this game. Anyways, I'll give you guys the Charlie outro. That's it. See ya.